Welcome to Sleepy Food Lore, a quiet space where food, memory, and history drift together like steam from a warm cup. Each evening, we follow one ingredient through its stories, its journeys across time, its presence in kitchens and rituals, and the quiet ways it has shaped our senses. Nothing to do now but listen and let the world slow down for a while. Tonight, we arrive softly at cinnamon. Its story doesn't begin with grand discovery, but with recognition. Most of us already know it without trying to remember how. It hides in the folds of our minds, in the way something smells when the air is warm, or when a cup of tea leans towards sweetness. Before it's explained, it's known. Before it's seen, it's felt. The scent of cinnamon has a way of finding you before you look for it. A small thread pulling through time. Slow mornings, baked things, soft warmth beneath laughter. Long before we learn what tree it comes from, or how the bark curls to dry, we carry it in memory. Cinnamon rarely announces itself. It simply appears, as though it's been waiting at the edges of your day. Maybe in the quiet sweetness of porridge, or the hum of spice in something simmering. Maybe you remember it without knowing, a comfort that doesn't call attention to itself. Tonight, we let cinnamon settle as our focus. Not as a lesson to absorb or a story to memorize, but as a companion, well known, always near, quietly waiting to be noticed again. Its warmth isn't an instruction to rest, but an invitation. The calm is already inside the moment we meet it. If you linger with the scent for long enough, it begins to trace faint images of wooden jars, of drifting bark, of light glowing through amber dust. Somewhere across centuries, it traveled through caravans and ships, carried as treasure, traded through ports whose names changed over time. Yet in every place it passed, it carried the same essence, the meeting of warmth and sweetness that the world kept finding new ways to love. Now, as we arrive at cinnamon in our own present stillness, its long past wraps itself around the moment. The spice that crossed oceans now rests quietly in a kitchen jar, waiting to be stirred or sprinkled. We don't need to hurry toward its history. It will unfold gently, just as its scent unfolds in the air. For now, there's only this, the warmth that feels both ancient and familiar, a whisper that finds its way back to you whenever the world slows enough to notice. So we begin our evening with that knowing, that cinnamon has always been here, close enough to touch, part of us long before we thought to ask for its name. Cinnamon begins as a tree, not a particularly grand one, not towering, not majestic in a way that draws the eye, but steady, quietly fragrant even in its living form. Its leaves hold a soft, hidden spice, a promise of flavor tucked beneath green stillness. It belongs to the laurel family, the same whose leaves whisper through soups and stews as bay leaves do. But in the case of cinnamon, it is not the leaf that becomes precious. It is the bark, the very skin of the tree, that carries the warmth we know so well. The making of cinnamon starts with patience. When a tree is young but strong, its outer bark is gently removed, revealing smooth inner layers that hold both scent and softness. These inner rings are peeled away in thin, flexible strips, still damp with the tree's quiet sap. There is a care to this moment, human hands separating the bark, not by force, but by understanding how it yields. The fragrance that escapes is sharp and bright at first, the deep spice still raw and alive. As these pale ribbons of bark dry, air and sunlight begin to change them. The smooth inner bark curls upon itself, rolling inward as moisture leaves it. The bending is natural, unforced, a response to its own fibers contracting to the simple act of drying in open air. This curling is how cinnamon becomes what we recognize, the soft scrolls known as quills. Each piece carries both roughness and delicacy, edges feathered by time and touch. Nothing about it is hurried. The bark finds its own shape as it rests. When the drying is complete, the bark darkens to that familiar brown we associate with the spice. The tone of earth, of warmth, of something gently smoldering. At this point, it can be left whole, packed in bundles of slender quills, or ground into the fine powder that slips easily into recipes. Both forms hold the same essence. It is simply a question of how one wishes to release it. The quill gives flavor slowly, unfolding in warmth over time, while the powder invites the spice to bloom immediately, dispersing its warmth at a touch. It is a small marvel that cinnamon is used in such delicate quantities. A pinch, a half teaspoon, a gentle stir into milk or batter. So little, and yet the effect is vivid. The spice does not need abundance to be felt. Its power lies in precision. Too much, and the warmth becomes something fierce. Too little, and it remains only a hint, something sensed but unnamed. That balance has been understood for centuries, an art passed quietly from cook to cook, hand to hand. When we taste the spice, what we are sensing is the tree's inner defense. Its natural oil, called cinnamaldehyde. In the living tree, it protects against insects and decay. In the kitchen, it becomes a gift of aroma and depth. When heat touches it, it changes again, rising in waves of scent that seem almost alive. Warm, faintly floral, sometimes even sweet. The oil passes easily through air, finding us before we even lift a spoon. And though cinnamon is often thought of as a single flavor, there are many kinds, each with its own character. The delicate, faintly citrus bark of Ceylon, sometimes called true cinnamon, has a gentle sweetness and paper-thin layers that break softly between fingers. The sturdier cassia varieties, rich in color and sharper in taste, are the cinnamon most homes know, bold, direct, comforting. Different lands nurtured different trees, yet each one became part of the same global scent memory, a universal warmth shaped by countless hands, dried under countless suns. If you hold a stick of cinnamon close, its texture tells you more than words can. The surface is rough but not harsh, smooth in places where bark meets twist. The scent lifts instantly, even unbroken. It is a quiet contradiction, a fragment of tree, once part of a living trunk, now transformed into something that evokes home, sweetness, firelight. A small piece of nature translated into human memory. That transformation, from tree to spice, from bark to comfort, is what gives cinnamon its particular aura. Nothing in its making feels mechanical. Every stage depends on patience, climate, timing, and care. The tree must heal and regrow after harvest. The bark must dry at its own pace. The hands that guide it must learn its rhythm. All of it happens quietly, without spectacle, yet the result is something instantly recognizable all over the world. So, when we think of cinnamon, the powder waiting in a jar, or the scroll resting in a cup of tea, it helps to remember what it truly is, the outer sign of an inner life. Once part of a living tree, it now carries within it both protection and invitation, a story told not in strength but in scent. The cinnamon tree grows in warmth. It belongs to a climate that never truly cools, places where air moves softly through evergreen leaves and rain drifts through seasons rather than storms. It is most at home near the equator, where sunlight lingers long enough for the soil to stay gentle and fragrant. In such air, the cinnamon tree extends upward in slender grace, its trunk smooth and pale, its leaves a deep waxy green touched with hints of red when young. The tree does not rise tall, it stays at a reachable height, welcoming human hands to tend it. When you walk among cinnamon trees, the scent doesn't rush to greet you. It waits closely within the bark, within the quiet pulse of the trunk. The leaves rustle lightly, hinting at spice when crushed between fingers, but the true aroma, that deep, golden warmth, lies hidden beneath the outer bark, calm and patient in its layer of living wood. Harvesting cinnamon is an act of both trust and understanding. The cultivator looks for a tree that has reached the right moment of maturity, strong enough to share, young enough to renew. The outer bark is scored carefully, then lifted away in narrow strips. The tool does not tear or force. It follows the natural seams of growth. Beneath that first layer lies the true treasure. The inner bark, tender and fragrant, pale in color and damp with aromatic oil. It is this layer that becomes cinnamon as we know it, but it is still alive at the moment it's taken, still soft, still pliant, still warm from the heart of the tree. Once separated, these inner curls are gathered and left to rest. The drying begins slowly, never rushed. The pieces are placed in the shade, where air moves freely but gently. Too much sun would steal the subtler notes of sweetness. Too little air would let moisture linger. The bark responds to this balance in its own quiet way, contracting as it loses water, curling inward until it shapes itself into the familiar role. This transformation is almost invisible as it happens, bark shifting by the hour, folding itself into a form that seems designed for remembering scent. As it dries, the cinnamon darkens, deepening from pale tan to a rich brown that catches light in soft patterns. The fragrance strengthens as moisture fades, becoming rounder, sweeter, more complex. The spice's character emerges only when it is no longer part of the living tree, and yet what made it beautiful was life itself. The steady rhythm of growth that allowed bark to form, to renew, to give again. The harvest is not final. A healthy tree will regrow after the outer bark has been removed, sending up fresh shoots from the root base. These young stems will, after time, provide new layers of bark for future harvests. This renewal can continue for many years, the same root system offering its gift again and again. In this way, cinnamon cultivation is cyclical rather than extractive, a rhythm between human and tree that depends on patience and respect for pace. To the eye, the cinnamon grove might seem simple, yet it holds an unspoken coordination. The workers move among the trunks with tools worn smooth from years of use. Each motion reflects knowledge measured not by clocks, but by seasons. The feel of bark beneath the hand, the sound as it separates from wood, the sense of when a strip is ready to peel cleanly. There is craftsmanship here, but also tenderness. To wound the tree is to begin its renewal, and that paradox shapes every harvest. In many of the regions where cinnamon grows, in Sri Lanka, southern India, Indonesia, the rhythm of cutting and drying forms part of the year's pattern, quietly woven into daily life. The scent of fresh bark may drift through coastal air, mixing with salt, soil, and smoke from evening fires. It clings to hands, to baskets woven from palm, to the folds of clothing. Each step in the process leaves a trace of spice behind. By the time the bark dries completely, it has already traveled far in sensory memory. The tree that stood bright and green beneath humid skies has become, through attention and care, a collection of scrolls light enough to carry across the world. Still, within each roll remains the memory of its beginning, of warm rain, soft soil, and the careful timing of human touch. The cinnamon tree does not rush its giving. It thrives where time itself moves slowly, measured not by noise or urgency, but by cycles of growth, rest, and return. Every phase, from tree to bark, from bark to spice, is a conversation between the natural world and those who listen closely enough to understand it. And so, the next time we lift a quill of cinnamon or stir a spoonful into a recipe, we might remember the tree itself, standing quietly in the heat, offering its bark to those who know how to ask gently. When cinnamon reaches the drying stage, its world changes. The green scent of the living tree fades, and something deeper begins to emerge. What was once soft and pliant slowly stiffens in warm air, and the vitality within the bark becomes still. It is in this stillness that cinnamon becomes itself. The process of drying draws out moisture, but also concentrates aroma. As water leaves the bark, the essential oil within it, that complex mixture of warmth, spice, and sweetness, becomes more pronounced. Each curl of bark holds the memory of the tree's sap, now transformed into fragrance alone. It is a quiet distillation, a turning inward. The bark no longer lives, yet it carries the full scent of its living form with even greater clarity. The transformation happens gradually. The bark is spread out or set into bundles, depending on tradition, sometimes air-dried under a canopy or left in shaded open air. The balance must be precise. Too fast, and the bark cracks harshly. Too slow, and moisture lingers where it is unwelcome. Over the course of days, or sometimes longer, each strip reaches its own point of readiness. The sound of it changes as it dries, from a soft, damp rustle to a crisp, papery whisper when handled. The edges curl upon themselves, forming those familiar scrolls that hold their shape for years. When fully dry, cinnamon holds a texture unlike any other spice. It is firm yet fragile, light yet durable. The curling gives it strength. The layers that once expanded with sap now press tightly together, making the quill both strong and delicate. Even when broken, the bark releases new waves of scent, proof that the drying has not dulled its essence, only sealed it within. This transformation from living bark to durable spice makes cinnamon one of nature's quiet preservations. Once dry, it resists decay. No cooling or strict protection is needed. The spice keeps itself well by design. Moisture has left, leaving behind oils that do not spoil easily, and a structure that discourages time itself. This is what allows cinnamon to travel, from humid forests to dry markets, from distant islands to the corners of countless kitchens. Long before refrigeration or sealed packaging, it knew how to last. The stability of dried cinnamon is more than practical. It shapes how we encounter it. Because it keeps well, it can be stored, exchanged, and shared across great distances. When a spice resists time, it becomes a story in motion, one that can fold into different cuisines, different traditions, centuries apart. What remains constant is its nature, the quiet endurance behind its fragrance. Holding a piece of dried cinnamon, you can feel time in its texture. The bark has become lightweight but strong, its surface marked by thin ridges and tiny variations in color. When rubbed between fingers, it warms slightly, releasing scent at the lightest touch. That warmth seems to come from within the bark itself, as though it remembers the sun that once dried it. In powder form, the transformation continues. The dried bark is ground into fine particles that keep the oil locked in place until heat or liquid awakens it. This is why a pinch of cinnamon in warm milk or batter feels so immediate. The essential oil hidden in the dryness has been waiting quietly, and only when moistened does it return to life. The flavor that fills the air is the same warmth that drifted through the trees where the spice was born. The remarkable thing about cinnamon as a dried food is that it balances permanence with fragility. It lasts for years if kept dry, yet each interaction, a grate of the bark, a stir of powder, releases something that cannot be captured again. Once released, the scent fades into air, leaving only memory. It is both enduring and fleeting, like a breath drawn deeply and then let go. This quality might explain why cinnamon has been prized for centuries. It offers both constancy and surprise. Stored carefully, it waits silently, unchanged. Yet the moment it meets warmth, it transforms again, a cycle of keeping and giving that seems endless. The drying process does not take away its spirit. It refines it, distills it into something that can sleep quietly until called upon. Imagine a storeroom filled with bundles of dried bark. The air would be heavy with sweetness, not sharp or overbearing, but deeply comforting, a scent that lingers in wood and cloth. That scent tells you that the spice is alive in its own way. Even dry, even still, it breathes faintly through time. In this preserved state, cinnamon becomes a bridge between moments. A green tree in a distant grove, the hands that peeled its bark, the air that dried it, and now the kitchens that open its fragrance once more. It is proof that something can endure precisely because it learns how to rest, how to hold its essence quietly until the right moment arrives. And so, as with many dried foods, cinnamon becomes both memory and possibility, a reminder that stillness can preserve as surely as movement, and that scent, when kept gently in the pause of dryness, holds a kind of endless life. Cinnamon has been known for thousands of years. Long before it dusted the tops of modern desserts or warmed the air from a kitchen stove, it belonged to an older world, one that moved more slowly, where scent traveled farther than names did. The spice was known before it was understood, desired before it was traced to its source. Its journey through history is, in many ways, a story about distance. The distance between knowing and possessing, between myth and trade, between the tree itself and those who dreamed of its fragrance across oceans. The earliest records of cinnamon appear in writings from ancient civilizations that rarely met face to face. In Egypt, it was valued not only as a flavor, but as a sacred substance. It was part of ritual mixtures, used in incense that drifted through temples, in balms that anointed the living and preserved the dead. The Egyptians did not grow cinnamon. They received it through trade, and so to them it came from mysterious lands somewhere beyond the horizon. Places filled with richness and risk, places few could name. To the Hebrews, Greeks, and Romans, cinnamon was equally revered. Ancient texts describe it as a gift fit for gods and rulers, a fragrance pleasing to both flesh and spirit. Poets compared its scent to the perfection of divine gardens, where air itself seemed perfumed with sweetness. In each culture it touched, cinnamon's origins were obscured by wonder. It was said to grow in hidden valleys guarded by serpents, or in nests of giant birds high on inaccessible cliffs. Such stories were not lies, but reflections of distance, attempts to imagine what could not yet be seen. Across centuries, cinnamon became part of the very language of luxury. It appeared in dowries, in royal treasuries, in lists of tribute paid to kings. Its worth was measured not by weight alone, but by its rarity. A small bundle of bark might equal days of labor. It was stored carefully, wrapped in cloth or sealed inside jars, its preservation both practical and symbolic, a reminder that time itself could be contained in a single scent. For most of history, the spice reached its distant buyers through slow networks of trade. Land routes carried it from the southern coast of India and Sri Lanka toward Arabia, through the Red Sea, across deserts, and into the bustling ports of the Mediterranean. Merchants passed it from one caravan to another, from ship to market, each exchange adding new layers of distance and myth. By the time cinnamon reached Europe or North Africa, it had traveled through so many hands that its original home was nearly forgotten. The traders who carried it guarded their knowledge carefully. For centuries, the true origins of cinnamon were kept secret by those who profited from mystery. Arab merchants told elaborate tales to protect the source, that cinnamon was harvested only when great birds abandoned their nests, or that collectors risked their lives to retrieve it from serpent-filled valleys. These stories, strange as they sound, served their purpose. They allowed rare spices to remain rare and wonder to remain profitable. The movement of cinnamon mirrored the pace of the ancient world. Ships carved slow paths across warm seas, bearing goods no heavier than silk or spice, yet worth more than gold. The spice's shelf stability made this possible. Unlike fruit or grain, it did not spoil under the weight of weeks or months. The bark waited patiently in sealed containers, its fragrance sealed behind dry layers that resisted decay. Its very endurance became part of its value, a proof of its purity a reassurance that time could not diminish its essence. Across centuries, cinnamon linked distant people in quiet ways. Wherever it traveled, it shaped flavor, ritual, and trade. In China, where other varieties grew under different names, it was folded into medicine and preserved fruit. In the Middle East, it scented stews and sweetened wine. In the cold north of Europe, it arrived much later, its warmth blossoming in winter feasts, in baked bread and mulled drink. Each culture found its own balance of sweetness and intensity, of myth and practicality, but all carried a sense that cinnamon was more than food. It was comfort embodied in scent. As history unfolded, cinnamon's path intertwined with ambition. The search for its source led explorers to map coastlines and cross oceans. When the ancient overland routes gave way to maritime trade, the Indian Ocean became a living network of spice and wind. Portuguese fleets sought the islands of Sri Lanka in the 15th century not only for territory, but for the promise of cinnamon's control. Later came the Dutch, the English, each empire drawn by the same allure. A bark that carried the memory of distant warmth and the promise of profit in its scent. And yet, beneath every grand ambition, the same quiet substance remained unchanged. The spice itself, resting in bundles, unbothered by who claimed it, still smelled of sweetness and wood. The human world rearranged around it. The ports, the treaties, the maps, but the fragrance that drifted from each rolled quill was eternal. Cinnamon's presence in early written records tells us something more profound, that human history is also a history of longing for connection through the senses. People traded spice not only to season food, but to carry memory, to bring the scent of faraway forests into their own homes, to feel, for a brief moment, that they had touched the mystery of elsewhere. Even now, when cinnamon is no longer rare, it keeps that quiet trace of distance. It remains associated with time, with the idea that something precious has come down to us, preserved from another age. Its scent still feels old, as though it cannot entirely belong to the present moment. That sense of history clings to it naturally, not through explanation, but through atmosphere, the way the bark itself carries the memory of heat and air from another place. In every age, cinnamon has been measured sparingly, a small quantity with the power to transform a dish, a room, or a moment. The ancient traders knew this instinctively. They carried it in compact bundles, sealed inside containers of clay or woven fiber, precious precisely because it needed no great volume to hold great value. It was power condensed to scent, substance made travel ready. To imagine those slow journeys, ships creaking under wind, caravans inching across pale deserts, is to see how the world once moved at the pace of spice. Cinnamon did not urge haste, it rewarded patience. Its stories grew richer with retelling, not repetition. Time itself seemed to bend around its endurance. And perhaps that is the quiet truth of cinnamon's long history, that through its patience, it taught us something about our own. For every civilization that sought it, traded it, or dreamed about it, cinnamon carried the same lesson. That value can live inside stillness, that warmth can travel farther than flame, and that something simple, gathered from the bark of a small tree, can loop the planet in scent and memory. Even now, when we reach for it in the calm of our kitchens, we are touching a fragment of that long, unbroken thread, a line of sweetness that stretches backward beyond memory, still warm with everything it has seen. Cinnamon has long belonged to both the practical and the sacred. It is one of those rare things that moves easily between kitchen and temple, medicine and memory. Its fragrance feels ancient, as though it has never been entirely separated from ritual. Wherever people learned to cherish warmth, they found a place for cinnamon. It was more than a spice. It was a presence, quiet, protective, enduring. Across many cultures, its scent became linked with safety. The warmth it brought to food or air was felt as a form of comfort, a small guardian against cold or darkness. In homes where the air was cool and the seasons uncertain, a hint of cinnamon in the cloths or cupboard suggested steadiness, a home cared for. The spice's very aroma seemed to hold the power to preserve, not simply the food it seasoned, but the feeling of well-being itself. In older ritual practices, cinnamon often appeared beside offerings of light or oil. It burned easily, releasing fragrant smoke that lifted through rooms or open air. In some traditions, it was believed that such smoke could carry prayers upward, guiding them into gentler listening. The combination of fire and scent gave cinnamon an aura of both earth and spirit, drawn from a tree's bark, yet returned to air in perfumed flame. Elsewhere, it marked the turning points of life. Mixed with honey or incense resin, it was used to bless spaces, to sweeten ceremonies of marriage or birth, and to soothe moments of farewell. These rituals varied across place and century, but their intent shared a similar understanding. Cinnamon represented continuity, the soft bond between living and remembered presence. It was not a loud symbol, not one demanding attention, but a quiet note, the fragrance you might notice only seconds after stepping into a room where devotion had just taken place. Many cultures carried stories, or fragments of stories, that described cinnamon as a protector. In certain folk traditions, it was kept near doorways or on windowsills, thought to shield the household from unseen harm. In others, the bark was boiled in simple infusions to bring strength or clarity. Even in the absence of elaborate myth, these uses reveal how deeply cinnamon connected with human desire for warmth and steadiness. It was believed to hold the memory of sunlight, to keep out chill both physical and spiritual. Traditional medicines drew on that same belief. In ancient China, a form of cinnamon called rogue was used to ignite internal warmth, restoring energy or circulation. In parts of India, it appeared in Ayurveda as a remedy for balance, something to calm, to awaken, to harmonize digestion. Physicians of the Mediterranean world wrote of cinnamon as both luxury and medicine. They noted its sharp sweetness, its power to warm the body gently, to preserve fruit or flesh, to stir vitality when combined with honey or wine. These writings did not invent its value. They echoed what daily experience had already shown. The spice, by its nature, resisted decay, and in that resistance, people found symbolism for endurance. But perhaps the most lasting connection cinnamon holds is not stored in books or formal teachings. It lives in memory through scent. Unlike a story shaped by words, fragrance seeps into the mind more quietly. It bypasses naming. A child growing up among kitchens scented with spice remembers the comfort long before learning what the spice is called. In that sense, cinnamon exists almost outside of storytelling. It does not need narrative to belong to memory. One breath of its aroma, years later, restores the feeling entire. The cupboards, the laughter, the worn warmth of familiarity. Even in sacred texts, cinnamon appears more as presence than instruction. In the Hebrew Bible, what many know through the book of Exodus, cinnamon is listed among the precious ingredients of holy anointing oil. It is placed beside myrrh, cassia, and fragrant calamus as one of the chosen elements that set objects apart for sacred use. Nothing in the text explains why cinnamon was chosen. There are no details of preparation or hierarchy. It is simply included, matter of fact, as though its worth needed no defense. The same pattern continues through later references. Poetic writings mention it as part of offerings, as sweetness upon beloved skin, as fragrance suitable for kings and temples. Yet nowhere is the focus its flavor on the tongue. It is always the aroma that holds meaning, the invisible veil that announces reverence. In that subtlety lies something profound. Cinnamon's value was sensed rather than seen, appreciated not for show, but for atmosphere. Through the long centuries, as faith traditions grew and intertwined, cinnamon remained a chosen scent for sacred spaces. Churches and temples alike cherished it as incense or essence, a link between the material and the unseen. The act of burning or anointing with cinnamon oil echoed gestures that had been performed thousands of years earlier under different skies. Each repetition renewed its symbolic life. Even outside of organized religion, the spice carried an aura of holiness. In households where it was scarce, it was saved for feast days. The simple act of adding cinnamon to bread or stew became an offering in itself, an expression of care, a promise that the moment deserved warmth. It was never overwhelming. A small pinch was enough. That restraint became part of its meaning. That comfort need not be excessive. That richness could come quietly. Everywhere it traveled, cinnamon adapted to local belief, yet maintained its essence. It was folded into the daily rhythm of hospitality, sprinkled into drinks offered to guests, infused into oils used for massage or healing, burned in mixtures meant to clear space. In these gestures, memory attached itself not to story, but to repetition. The familiarity of the scent became its own reassurance. Over time, even as cinnamon became common, it lost none of its symbolic weight. People continued to describe it as warm, protective, or restorative, almost as though those qualities existed within the spice itself, rather than in human association. In a way, both are true. The spice affects body and mind alike. Its oils warming the palate, its scent triggering comfort through memory. In the layered quiet of cultural remembrance, cinnamon reminds us of continuity. The same bark used in temple oil now resting centuries later in a kitchen jar. There is a particular gentleness in how cinnamon unites the ordinary and the sacred. It never demanded new rituals. It slipped naturally into ones that already existed. Its power lies not in rarity, but in recognition, that instant awareness of something both earthy and transcendent. When a pot on the stove releases a faint curl of cinnamon-scented steam, that fragrance joins every past moment it has ever warmed. And so, when cinnamon appears in the oldest scriptures, it feels less like a commodity and more like acknowledgement. It does not ask attention. It simply exists as fragrance shaped by purpose. Even its biblical inclusion among the precious blends of oil, or as an emblem of divine delight, speaks to what people already knew, that some scents contain a peace so enduring it does not need to be named. In the end, folklore and faith alike return to the same truth. Cinnamon survives not as a grand myth, but as a constant. Its meaning has never required explanation because it is felt instinctively, in warmth, in safety, in quiet wholeness. It continues to connect worlds, the sacred and the domestic, the ancient and the present, the remembered and the real. Perhaps that is why the simplest moment, the scent of cinnamon rising from something warm, can feel larger than its cause. It carries the remembrance of prayers, trade routes, rituals, and stories, all condensed into the air. What lingers is more than nostalgia. It is a living fragrance, a thread running through time, binding the countless hands and hearts that have reached for it across centuries. And through that quiet continuity, cinnamon becomes what it has always been, a sign of warmth, a keeper of calm, and a gentle reminder that the sacred often hides in the ordinary breath of spice drifting through the room. Every spice, no matter how familiar, holds another world inside it. Cinnamon, thin as paper and light as dried bark, seems simple at first glance. Yet within those curls lies a complex architecture, a structure built from fiber, oil, and memory. When we grind it or warm it, we are not merely releasing scent. We are awakening a design that has been resting quietly since the spice was part of the living tree. The visible bark is only the surface. Beneath its smooth brown tone lies a network of plant fibers, packed in thin layers like pages pressed together. These fibers once carried water and nutrients through the tree's body, but after harvesting and drying, they become channels for something else entirely. They trap and protect the aromatic oils that make cinnamon recognizable, oils that formed while the tree was alive and remain long after it has become spice. Those oils are held inside the smallest cells of the bark. Under magnification, each piece of cinnamon reveals hollow spaces and fine capillaries lined with resin. It is here, deep within the structure, that the essential oils rest, invisible but potent, quiet until called upon. The bark's natural design is what allows the scent to linger for so long. It is not porous in the way paper or cloth might be. The oils do not escape easily. They wait. When cinnamon is ground, many of these tiny cells break open. Their contents mix with air, releasing the fragrance almost instantly. That first rush of scent is a bloom of oil meeting oxygen. The moment the unseen becomes perceptible is the reason a whole cinnamon stick smells subtle compared to powder. Grinding invites disclosure. The structure that once protected the oils now releases them into the room. Among these aromatic compounds, one stands out above all others: cinnamaldehyde. It is the source of that familiar golden warmth we know as the smell of cinnamon. The name may sound chemical or distant, yet it is a natural molecule created by the tree to defend itself and to communicate with its surroundings. In the wild, cinnamaldehyde deters insects and fungi. In our world, it transforms air into comfort. When you warm cinnamon in tea, in baking, or even by touch, the cinnamaldehyde begins to move. Heat and moisture loosen the oil from the bark's fibers and allow it to travel outward. It changes state almost invisibly, turning into vapor that rises through air. This is what we perceive as fragrance. Trace molecules reaching our senses, each one carrying a pattern that the brain translates as warmth, familiarity, or calm. That vapor carries other companions. Alongside cinnamaldehyde are smaller amounts of eugenol, coumarin, cinnamyl acetate, and terpene derivatives, all subtle contributors to the spice's layered personality. Some add notes of sweetness or wood, others of dryness or clove. Together, they create the full picture of cinnamon's scent, not sharp but rounded, both bright and deep. What we recognize as a single aroma is, in truth, a harmony of many invisible voices. Inside a single piece of bark, these compounds remain remarkably stable. Protected from light and moisture, the oils retain their potency for months, sometimes years. The bark's own composition, mostly plant cellulose and lignin, acts as a natural vessel, sealing the oils in place. Even when ground into powder, cinnamon resists quick decay. The same strength that allowed the tree to endure the elements grants the spice its quiet permanence. There is a certain beauty in how the spice holds both fragility and endurance. The bark can splinter under gentle pressure, yet within that brittle form rests chemistry strong enough to outlast time and travel. This balance between delicacy and resilience mirrors the feeling it creates. The softness of scent paired with the durability of memory. If we could trace a cinnamon stick back to its inner structure, we would find that almost half of its mass is simple plant fiber, cellulose and hemicellulose, materials that provide strength rather than flavor. The rest is a small mix of starch, sugars, protein traces, and about 1 to 3% essential oils. Such small numbers, yet that tiny fraction carries everything that makes cinnamon what it is. A few drops of oil within an entire stick define an ancient trade, 1,000 stories, and the world's sense of warmth. When heat reaches those oils, the transformation is immediate but gentle. They do not burn easily. They release themselves by degrees. This is why cinnamon works so differently in cooking compared to quick spices like pepper or ginger. Its aroma develops slowly, deepening as time and temperature invite the compounds to dissolve into fat, liquid, or air. The longer the warmth, the rounder the flavor. Patience is rewarded with depth. Moisture, too, has its part. When cinnamon meets liquid, the fibers swell, stretching just enough to free the trapped oils. The scent grows stronger, filling the space softly rather than abruptly. You can hear this change when a stick first meets water. A faint hiss, then a gradual unfolding of perfume as though the spice is remembering what it once was. Inside those oils, there's a secret symmetry between plant and human experience. The same molecules that once protected the tree against cold or insect now comfort the mind that inhales them. The warmth that began as defense has become a form of peace. When we breathe in the aroma, our senses respond not only to pleasure, but to recognition. The subtle understanding that what feels good to us once kept life safe for the tree. This connection between chemistry and emotion explains why scent memory feels so deep. Smell reaches the oldest parts of the brain, bypassing language and logic. A single breath of cinnamon can recall times and places we thought forgotten. It is chemistry moving across memory, the physical world speaking directly to the inner one. And yet, most of what exists inside cinnamon remains unseen. The fine structure, the cellular network, the microscopic oil droplets, all hidden until the spice is crushed or heated. Even then, what we perceive is suggestion rather than sight. The interior does its work quietly, remaining a mystery even as it reveals itself. To think of cinnamon this way, not only as flavor, but as architecture, is to understand how much complexity can sit inside stillness. The bark holds both history and design. Its scent carries both memory and molecule. All of it coexists within something we can hold between two fingers, something that seems small, yet contains entire worlds of transformation. In that way, cinnamon mirrors the rhythm of the earth itself. Processes layered upon each other, invisible yet dependable, intricate yet calm. Each quill is a fragment of plant life translated into art by nature and time. Fiber turned to fragrance, chemistry turned to comfort. And perhaps that is what holds our attention most. Cinnamon's calm is not contrived. It comes from the balance of what is inside. The interplay of structure, oil, and air, resting in harmony until touched by warmth. Its peace is literal, chemical, and absolute. When we speak of its soothing presence, we are perhaps unknowingly describing the silent order that lives within it. Cinnamon, even when dry and quiet, continues to hold life's smallest essentials inside it. Beyond its warmth and scent, within the fine weave of its bark, are traces of plant compounds called polyphenols. These are subtle, naturally occurring protectors, molecules that once served the tree's own balance, now carried gently into ours. Polyphenols are common throughout the plant world. They are part of how leaves, bark, fruit, and seed respond to sunlight and stress. In the living tree, they help to guard against oxidation and damage, giving strength to the tissue and color to the surface. In cinnamon, they reside mostly in the fibrous walls, bound to the same structures that keep the bark strong. When the tree becomes spice, most of these compounds remain, folded within the dry matter like quiet witnesses to all that came before. Unlike the bright oils that release into the air, polyphenols stay hidden. They do not rise in scent or flavor, but rest in the lasting body of the spice. Present in small amounts, they outlast even the aromatic oils, surviving time, temperature, and travel. They are not concentrated pieces of medicine. They are fragments of the same system that kept the tree whole. Their power lies not in intensity, but in their quiet persistence. Their life in the spice does not end when the bark is crushed or steeped. Once eaten, These compounds move slowly through the human body, passing, for the most part, undigested, serving purposes that are indirect yet enduring. They interact softly, meeting the living community that exists within us, the countless bacteria and microorganisms that make up the gut microbiome. Here, in this unseen ecosystem, the story of cinnamon continues in a new form. The polyphenols act as conversation pieces between plant and microbe. They are complex molecules, too large for most of our own cells to fully use, but the small inhabitants of our intestines meet them with ease. Certain bacteria can draw energy from these compounds, transforming them into simpler shapes, some of which may join our own metabolism. Others pass through untouched, but provide structure and nourishment for those microbial communities that thrive in their presence. The process is not immediate. It unfolds quietly over time across many meals and moments. When cinnamon joins other foods, grains, fruits, milk, honey, the polyphenols travel alongside fibers, mingling with the natural materials that keep digestion slow. The fiber of the bark itself moves at an unhurried pace, slightly rough, yet soft enough to pass through digestion hole. Carrying the polyphenols, it ensures these compounds meet the gut gently, releasing them where the body is calmest. This slow movement is part of a larger pattern. Food, in the deeper sense, is not a single event. It is a rhythm of exchange between body and world. In this rhythm, cinnamon plays a modest note. Its involvement is not loud enough to claim attention, yet it adds subtle harmony, a faint influence that reflects the tree's own habits, patient, balanced, enduring. The presence of polyphenols is one of the connections between plant life above the earth and the hidden life within us. Through them, something of the tree's resilience becomes part of our own inner landscape. Their activity is gentle, even symbolic. They remind us that our well-being depends as much on quiet cooperation as on any sudden effect. Nothing in their nature invites haste. When scientists study these compounds, they often use the language of reaction and oxidation of metabolites and pathways. But in the larger rhythm of living, these same interactions are simply continuations of the world's balance. The tree once stood against wind and sun, maintaining its form through these polyphenols. Now, after harvest and preparation, the same molecules continue their silent work, passing through systems and cycles beyond the bark. The human gut, though unseen, mirrors a forest in its variety and complexity. Every breath we take, every piece of food we eat, sustains an inner grove of life. To imagine cinnamon entering that grove is to imagine the meeting of two calm worlds, one that grew under sun and one that thrives in shadow. The spice arrives not as conqueror, but as visitor, adding its fiber, its minor oils, and its polyphenols into the conversation already taking place. In this exchange, cinnamon contributes quietly. The bark softens as it moves, perhaps releasing some of its bound compounds, offering them slowly to whatever parts of us can receive them. There is no single point of transformation, no clear switch. It is an ongoing relationship, as subtle as scent in the air. Over time, such exchanges matter, not for their drama, but for their consistency. The idea that food interacts with life inside us is ancient. Long before modern understanding of microbiomes, people noticed that certain spices seem to bring comfort, to ease digestion, or to steady the stomach after heavy meals. Such observations did not rest on measurement. They arose from experience repeated enough to become intuition. Cinnamon, used with moderation, found its place among these comfortable companions. Its pattern has always been inclusion rather than emphasis. A small amount quietly folded in, shaping the whole without dominating. To think of polyphenols and fiber in this context is to see how nature designs for cooperation. The same substance that strengthens the tree's form offers texture to our food, and the same compounds that protected the bark now interact with the smallest forms of life within us. Nothing here demands belief or promise. It is simply how life tends to work, system within system, each contributing more to the whole than to the self. When we speak of cinnamon's influence on the gut, it is not as a cure or claim, but as a continued relationship between body and earth. Its fiber moves as it always has, steadily, unhurried, and its polyphenols, unchanged by heat or time, remain part of the food's quiet language. The journey is natural, unforced, a small echo of the cycle through which all nourishment passes: growth, harvest, transformation, renewal. Even the act of using cinnamon reflects this cooperation. It rarely stands alone. It mixes into other flavors, into grains, fruits, or cacao, each combination altering what reaches the palate and, eventually, the body. The spice's contribution is never overwhelming. It lends tone, balance, and rhythm. The same is true of its movement through digestion. Small, deliberate presence rather than dominant action. Perhaps this is why cinnamon feels like an ingredient of reassurance. It reminds us, even in science, that life's activity is often invisible. Within each spoonful, connections form and dissolve in silence. Molecules shaped by sunlight in a distant grove now travel through another kind of living environment, our own, and return eventually to the soil through natural cycles. Energy moves on, but nothing is lost. When placed within that cycle, even complex ideas like polyphenols and microbiomes become simpler. They show that the world does most of its work quietly, through cooperation and time. Cinnamon happens to be part of that quiet work. It contributes without announcement, reflecting the same patience that shaped its bark and scent. No promises are offered here, only observation. Cinnamon carries fragments of the tree's defense and endurance, and those fragments continue their journey in us. Its value lies in belonging to something larger, the web that connects growth, decay, renewal, and memory. To notice that connection is to feel, perhaps unconsciously, the same calm embedded in the spice itself. In this way, even at the molecular level, cinnamon teaches the same subtle lesson it always has. That richness does not depend on immediacy, and that small presences, unseen and unhurried, can quietly shape the world they pass through. Cinnamon has always been described as warming. The word appears again and again across centuries and cultures, spoken not as measurement, but as feeling. It is a warmth that does not rise suddenly like flame, but gathers slowly, spreading through food, through air, and through memory. The warmth is not temperature alone, it is presence. It invites rather than demands, and it lingers long after the spice itself has disappeared from the tongue. Used in small quantities, cinnamon moves quietly through the body. It does not press or demand attention. A pinch in a drink, a light dusting over fruit, a swirl through thick batter, always just enough to notice, never enough to dominate. The modest amount is what allows it to feel natural. The spice settles seamlessly among other flavors, its soft strength balanced by restraint. Throughout traditional writings, cinnamon was considered a companion to heavier foods, to roasted grains, slow-cooked stews, and rich desserts. In colder regions, it appeared where density or sweetness might need a lift, a spark of light to ease digestion, a counterbalance to weight. Across distant cuisines, the same understanding surfaced again and again, that cinnamon's role was not to overtake, but to support. It warmed, but did not burn, stimulated without force, blended rather than separated. The perception of warmth comes partly from its chemistry, the cinnamaldehyde and related oils that awaken the senses with brightness and heat, but also from association. We link its scent to hearth and comfort, to kitchens that feel safe. It enters the body through the nose before the mouth, telling the mind to expect gentleness. What follows in taste is always a confirmation of that expectation, a soft alignment between aroma and experience. This connection between scent and body is subtle. The moment cinnamon meets warmth, whether in a cup or a pan, its volatile oils rise on the air and travel directly to the sensory centers that regulate appetite and pleasure. Breathing the aroma can soften tension, not through command, but through familiarity. It reminds the body of nourishment before nourishment happens. This is perhaps why the act of cooking with cinnamon feels calming in itself. Even before the food is tasted, something in the air has already given ease. The body's response to cinnamon is not dramatic. It is measured like the spice itself. The heat we feel is slight, a faint flush, a quiet stirring of circulation, a gentle return of awareness to the skin. Traditional practitioners from diverse cultures describe this not as stimulation, but as balance. The way a cold day meets the warmth of fabric, or a tired body finds comfort and rest. The word warming means less about temperature than about restoration. Even in the smallest portion, cinnamon seems to encourage attentiveness. Its flavor sits at a point between sweet and sharp, between vivid and soft. As it fades, it leaves the mouth awake but untroubled. This fleeting quality is part of its charm. It reminds us that comfort need not be permanence. The warm note is enough, a signal of life continuing in quiet rhythms. Cinnamon's behavior in cooking follows the same principle. Chefs and home cooks alike add it sparingly, adjusting without announcement, tasting slowly until balance appears. The spice asks for intuition more than measurement. It prefers to harmonize with what surrounds it rather than to occupy center stage. And in that cooperation lies a certain calm, a sensory echo of the patience that shaped the bark itself. When paired with heavier ingredients, milk, nuts, butter, grain, cinnamon does more than flavor. It connects the body to a sense of grounding. It gives weight a companion, density a counterpart. Its warmth feels rooted, and yet it brings lightness. In such harmony, the body finds recognition, the kind that requires no thought at all. Perhaps this is where cinnamon's true gentleness resides, in the way it teaches through example. It shows how small presences can influence the whole, how warmth can coexist with stillness, and how comfort can arise not from abundance, but from balance. It acts upon the body as it does upon the mind, not demanding response, merely offering space for it to occur. So, when we taste cinnamon, we are also tasting adjustment, the quiet art of enough. A slight sweetness, a calm heat, a trace of something both physical and invisible. It is a warmth that meets us halfway and leaves room for rest in the spaces it fills. Not all cinnamon is the same. Beneath the single name lies more than one tree, more than one origin, and more than one expression of warmth. Like voices from the same family, each speaks with its own inflection, tones that feel familiar but carry subtle differences when listened to closely. These varieties have traveled uneven paths across time, shaped by geography, trade, and taste. Yet the essence of all remains unmistakably cinnamon. The two forms we most often meet are known as Ceylon and Cassia. Each is grown from a different species, each shaped by the soil and climate that nurtured it, and yet both share the same gentle heart of spice. Ceylon cinnamon, sometimes called true cinnamon, comes primarily from Sri Lanka, the island once known as Ceylon. Its bark is thin and delicate, made up of many fine layers rolled together like parchment. When broken, it flakes softly rather than shattering. The color tends toward golden tan, sometimes tinged with light amber, a shade more reminiscent of sun-warmed sand than deep wood. Its flavor is subtle, refined, and faintly sweet, a whisper more than an announcement. It lingers on the tongue as a soft echo of citrus and warmth, less fiery than one might expect. Cassia cinnamon, by contrast, draws from several related trees found across southern China, Indonesia, and Vietnam. Its bark is thicker and firmer, rolled into sturdier, single-layered curls. The color often deepens toward red-brown, and the scent arrives stronger, more immediate, sharper at first breath. The taste is bold, familiar to most kitchens, resonant with spice and depth. It carries the body of the flavor, the sturdiness that makes cinnamon recognizable in everyday life. In appearance, their differences are visible to the careful eye. The Ceylon quill fragile and many-layered, the Cassia stick robust and nearly solid. When ground into powder, those distinctions blur. Most of the time, we encounter Cassia without even knowing it. It is the cinnamon of supermarket shelves, of packaged baking spice, of home recipes across continents. Cheaper to harvest and easier to transport, Cassia has long formed the backbone of global trade. Historically, these practicalities shaped the world's perception of cinnamon. Cassia was hardy and slow to spoil, qualities that matched the rhythm of merchant ships and long caravans. During centuries of commerce, it became the cinnamon that most people knew, a symbol of warmth accessible to every household. Ceylon cinnamon, more fragile and limited by geography, remained a prize of distinction. Its subtler flavor traveled less widely, not because it lacked value, but because its thin bark required more attentive handling. Even so, In most kitchens, the differences between the two are rarely noticed. Both share the same essence of sweetness and heat, drawn from the same family of aromatic compounds. Unless tasted side by side, they speak the same language. The choice between them has usually been one of availability rather than preference. You use what your market offers, and what memory associates with comfort becomes, by default, the right one. When cassia is ground, its thicker bark delivers a deeper color and stronger aroma. The flavor can be described as warm with a trace of sweetness, but also firm and woodier, lingering longer on the tongue. This is the cinnamon often folded into apple pie, stirred into oatmeal, or simmered in mulled wine. It withstands heat and sugar without being lost. Its presence steady from start to finish. Its sturdiness makes it dependable, a companion for recipes that call for certainty. Ceylon, with its finer layers and lower oil content, feels gentler. When used whole, the quills release a scent that is light, sometimes floral, and faintly reminiscent of clove and citrus combined. In powder form, it colors food only faintly and dissolves with ease. Some cooks prefer it for delicate dishes where nuance matters more than strength. A custard, a tea, or a lightly sweetened rice. Its charm lies in suggestion, an elegance that never overwhelms. It leaves space both for air and for thought. For centuries, these variations shaped quiet differences in local foodways. In Sri Lanka and southern India, Ceylon cinnamon folded naturally into daily cooking, part of aromatic blends that perfume curries or sweets without dominating them. Further north and east, where cassia trees grew more plentifully, its stronger bark defined the regional profile of spice. Across the ancient trade routes, where merchants carried both kinds, their names often blurred, their identities merging into one. The world learned to love cinnamon not as a single plant, but as a family of sensations bound by warmth. When people later distinguished between them, it was less a matter of rivalry and more a gesture of curiosity. Each serves its moment. Cassia is the voice that speaks clearly across distance. Ceylon is the whisper that draws the listener closer. The two do not compete. They coexist, sharing the same space in the imagination as variations of a single tone. In the shops and storerooms of the modern world, cassia remains the most common. It lines the spice aisles in glass jars and paper packets, its deep aroma instantly familiar. It is the cinnamon of festivals and of home kitchens, accessible and ready. Ceylon, often labeled true cinnamon, still appears as rarity. Its price higher, its role more fragile, its flavor quieter. For the everyday cook, the two are more alike than different. The differences are felt not in necessity, but in awareness. There's a quiet satisfaction in knowing their distinction. To recognize that the cinnamon in your cupboard might have journeyed from Indonesia rather than Sri Lanka does not change its use, but it deepens appreciation. Every variety carries the same ancient promise: warmth, continuity, and the echo of landscapes far beyond the kitchen window. When crushed or steeped, both kinds unfold similar chemistry. The essential oils in cassia are often slightly stronger in cinnamaldehyde, granting the spice its vivid scent, while Ceylon leans toward lighter notes, a balance of eugenol and other compounds that lend softness. Yet both remain unmistakably themselves. bark transformed into fragrance, tree life rendered into memory. For most, the pleasure lies not in comparison, but in recognition. Whether poured into tea, added to a meal, or remembered in the air, both kinds bring the same sense of warmth and peace. The body does not measure which bark it came from. The memory only remembers that the moment was sweet and the air was kind. Through time, the world has gently settled into acceptance. There is no argument between true and not true, no hierarchy that matters in the end. The word cinnamon embraces them both, the thin, papery curls from island groves and the sturdy, red-brown rolls from wider lands. Each carries the scent of sun and patience. Each makes the world taste a little warmer. If there is a lesson here, it might be that sameness and difference can coexist quietly, without verdict. Like two notes of the same song, they create harmony rather than hierarchy. The spice itself invites that calm comparison, a recognition that variation is not division, and that comfort can arrive in many forms of the same name. And so, when we open a jar of cinnamon and breathe in the scent, whether it leans bright and gentle or dark and strong, we're sharing in a lineage longer than memory. All the world's types of cinnamon, gathered through trade, adaptation, and care, have joined to form the idea of cinnamon that lives in our collective understanding. The smell we know belongs not to any one tree, but to the shared story of them all. Every spice changes its nature depending on how it's held. Cinnamon, perhaps more than most, moves easily between two lives, one whole, one ground, each with its own temper and rhythm. Together, they form a quiet dialogue between endurance and immediacy, patience and presence. Whole cinnamon is the form closest to the tree. The quills, rolled from thin sheets of bark, keep their strength and shape through time. When stored properly, they ask for little, just dryness, still air, and a shaded corner away from heat. In these simple conditions, the bark rests almost as if asleep, holding its fragrance within tight curls. The oils stay hidden until warmth or abrasion releases them, so the scent remains subtle, restrained. Months can pass without noticeable change. Even years later, the cinnamon will still breathe faintly of its original spice, aged but intact. In contrast, ground cinnamon begins its final transformation the moment it is made. Once broken apart, the fine powder exposes more surface to air. Each grain offers a tiny door for the aromatic oils to escape, and with every opening comes a little more fragrance. Immediate, luminous, but brief. The scent is stronger at first breath and softer with time, a bright flare that gradually becomes memory. Where the whole stick stands as a keeper of time, the ground spice embodies the present. It is ready to mingle with other ingredients, to dissolve into warmth, to reveal everything at once. Its texture makes it universal, easy to whisk in a dough, sprinkle over fruit, or stir into milk. The powder meets the air easily, arriving in the senses faster than patience can form. Yet that same openness is what limits its life. Once ground, cinnamon begins a quiet dispersal of itself, slowly trading its hidden essence for a few moments of vivid scent. The choice between the two is rarely a matter of rule, but of intention. For dishes that unfold slowly, a simmering tea, a broth, a spice syrup, The whole stick is chosen for its steadiness. It releases flavor by degrees, deepening without ever overtaking. The cook may remove the quill when the time feels right, leaving behind warmth without residue. Ground cinnamon, by contrast, works best where immediacy is wanted. In baked foods, desserts, or morning drinks, where spice must reveal itself fully and quickly before heat transforms it. Texture matters as much as flavor. Ground cinnamon blends evenly, disappearing into batter or cream, coloring the mixture faintly gold. Whole cinnamon, solid and steady, holds its identity to the end. When stirred in liquid, it stays visible, a reminder of structure beneath the scent. Each offers a different kind of beauty. One integrated, the other distinct, both subtle when used sparingly. Because cinnamon's presence is strong even in small amounts, both forms are best treated with lightness. A pinch of powder or a single stick can fill a room with scent more effectively than abundance ever could. The spice teaches by example that richness lies in restraint. The warmth you sense is more lasting when it arrives gently. How we keep cinnamon reflects how we approach time. Both whole and ground are stored away from light, as sunlight would steal their aroma little by little. They prefer containers that breathe only enough to protect from moisture, glass jars sealed loosely, tins hidden in shaded cabinets. The space around them should stay dry, neither hot nor cold, preserving that delicate balance between strength and rest. In these conditions, whole cinnamon can last for years. Its bark remains sturdy, its fragrance intact, waiting patiently for the day it is summoned to flavor something new. Ground cinnamon, though shorter-lived, carries its own quiet advantage. Its life is measured in months, but the freshness of its first weeks can be unmatched. Over time, its surface scent fades, but beneath fragments of aroma remain, gently reawakening when stirred through heat. When you open a jar that hasn't been used in a while, the first breath of cinnamon may seem softer than you remember. This is its natural rhythm of fading. Not loss, but transformation. The sharp top notes of sweetness ease into lower tones of wood, of dust, of the spice's deeper heart. What remains is still beautiful, quieter, earthier, more patient. Using cinnamon gradually becomes a kind of seasonal ritual. You learn when to trust the sticks sleeping at the back of the pantry, when to reach for a fresh packet of powder. You begin to notice how humidity, warmth, and the passing of seasons change the scent. Perhaps, without intending to, you come to know the spice as a companion that travels at its own pace through time. Some people keep both forms side by side. The quills for infusions and contemplation, the powder for ease and immediacy. Others cling to one, appreciating the simplicity of habit. Neither is better. Like the two kinds of cinnamon that exist across the world, whole and ground complete each other. They form balance between what endures and what blooms, between the stored and the released. To store cinnamon, to open it, to use it sparingly. Each of these small acts corresponds to the natural rhythm of the spice itself. Care and patience preserve it. Warmth brings it to life, and restraint lets its beauty remain whole. In the movement between sealed jar and open air, cinnamon teaches what the tree once knew. That strength lies in stillness, that fragrance waits for the right moment, and that time, handled gently, will always return something of its sweetness. And so, the next time you reach for the jar, whichever kind it holds, take a moment to notice what happens. The faint sound of glass twisting open, the first lift of aroma, the small swirl of air that replaces what was lost. What escapes is the scent of history and sunlight made tangible again. The quiet journey from tree to powder, from earth to memory. Nothing in that exchange demands attention, yet somehow it fills the room. Whole or ground, stored or freshly opened, cinnamon remains faithful to its nature. It holds, releases, and transforms, all in its own soft rhythm. Its calm stays constant, surviving years on a shelf or a single moment in heat, reminding us that persistence and impermanence are not opposites but partners, both part of the same fragrance that never really fades. Cinnamon's story has carried it across centuries of trade and belief, but its most constant home is the kitchen. In sweet cooking, cinnamon works like sunlight filtered through clouds. It brings warmth, not brightness, depth rather than sweetness itself. It is rarely the main ingredient. Instead, it leans quietly against others, drawing their flavors forward. Heat releases its aroma, that familiar sweetness that carries through kitchens and hallways, announcing something is near completion. The scent is inviting but tempered, filling air rather than commanding it. Cinnamon spreads its flavor evenly, traveling through mixtures as if guided by calm purpose. By the time the oven door opens, it has already disappeared into harmony. The spice itself almost invisible, yet the absence of it instantly felt if left behind. It is remarkable how small the amount needs to be. A pinch is often enough to define a dish. Too much shifts the balance, and the warmth sharpens into bitterness. But used with care, cinnamon gives body to sugar, brightness to butter, and a deeper echo to flour. In pudding, cake, pastry, or bread, cinnamon expands through scent before it reaches the tongue. Even as the batter rises, the room changes. A simple kitchen becomes a place of comfort. Light and memory seem to deepen together. Few spices achieve that quiet completeness. The warmth of baking transforms cinnamon into a memory as much as a flavor. You may not recall how much cinnamon went into the dough, but you will remember the scent on the oven air, the light on the table, the small hush that followed before the first bite. It can appear 1,000 times in 1,000 kitchens and never lose its welcome. In savory cooking, cinnamon shows another side of its humility. A small pinch folded into broth or stew changes the tone of the dish without shifting its identity. It deepens rather than decorates. In many cuisines, cinnamon belongs to the foundation. One quiet note among onions, cloves, or bay. Its role is not to be tasted alone, but to keep the whole in balance. Across the world, cinnamon finds its place among savory traditions. In Middle Eastern teapots of rice and lamb where it meets cardamom and cumin. In Indian garam masala, adding warmth without sweetness. In slow braises of North Africa, where cinnamon lingers behind fruit and spice alike. Even in Europe, it once flavored meat pies and sauces before sugar became common. The spice has simply moved with taste, adapting quietly to time's shifting appetite. In each of these uses, cinnamon functions as a kind of bridge. It connects sharp flavors to soft ones, brings warmth to sourness and carries heaviness toward balance. When ground, cinnamon weaves itself invisibly through sauces and stews. When whole, the quill sits upright like a calm observer, its contributions measured by the slow release of scent. Because cinnamon's nature is subtle, it rarely overwhelms. The flavors of savory food pass through it like light through smoke, altered but not obscured. One might never remark, "I taste cinnamon," and yet feel that something essential has been included. It is the difference between what exists and what is complete. Back in the realm of sweet cooking, cinnamon's repetition becomes part of its charm. Generations have added it to doughs, cakes, and pastries so often that its scent feels almost ancestral, like a language learned in the body before thought. The process repeats, each time slightly new, but always recognized. Sugar whisked with spice, softened butter folded in, a batter poured carefully into its pan. The oven door closes. The air begins to change. Baking turns cinnamon from powder to atmosphere. The oils hidden in the spice awaken under heat, rising upward in invisible spirals of scent. Within minutes, they coat the kitchen with warmth. This is the moment many people remember most clearly. Not the taste, but the presence of cinnamon as part of home. It transforms houses into memory the way light transforms glass into glow. When the baked dish emerges, bread, bun, or cake, the aroma settles rather than fades. Cinnamon in baking fulfills expectations rather than challenges them, and that may be why it feels restful. It offers no demand for novelty. It simply returns, each time, the same gentle pleasure. Every time it is added to flour or stew or tea, it renews its promise that the world's smallest sweetness, used with patience, can carry warmth farther than anything louder ever could. So, whether in the slow lift of a cake in the oven or the quiet thickening of a simmering sauce, cinnamon's presence remains constant. The spice never forces its identity, but somehow holds the center of everything it touches. The cook need not name it or praise it. They will simply know by scent and by quiet satisfaction that the food has found balance. Cinnamon rolls, apples with cinnamon, porridge, and warm drinks all show how the same spice moves gently through different parts of daily life, repeating itself without ever feeling intrusive. Each use is simple in motion, but deep in familiarity, and together they form a quiet rhythm of sweetness, warmth, and time. Cinnamon rolls begin with the dough rolled out patiently until it becomes a soft, even sheet. The surface is brushed or dotted with something rich, and then cinnamon is sprinkled evenly across it, carried by sugar or resting directly on the dough. The layer is thin, but it reaches every corner, making sure that no bite will be without the quiet warmth of spice. When the dough is rolled up again, it wraps that cinnamon inside, turning a flat surface into a gentle spiral. Each turn encloses scent and sweetness into soft layers. The roll is then cut into portions, each slice holding its own small spiral of cinnamon at the center. Arranged close together and given time to rise, the pieces grow into one another before they finally meet the oven's heat. As they bake, the dough sets and softens at the same time, the swirls holding their shape while the cinnamon melts slightly into the chrome. The scent that fills the kitchen is both promised and familiar. the result arriving exactly as expected. The pairing of apple and cinnamon follows a similar logic of comfort, but with different textures and light. Apples are sliced, each piece carrying a fresh, pale scent of its own. When cinnamon is added lightly, it does not cover the apple's character. It leans gently against it. A dusting over the slices or a small spoon stirred through a pan of fruit is enough to change the feeling of the dish. As heat softens the apple, the fruit begins to release its own juice, and the cinnamon dissolves into it, tinting it darker and warming its aroma. The combination feels natural, as though the two were always meant to meet this way. The softness of the cooked fruit and the gentle spice become a single, familiar taste. This pairing has been repeated across generations in pies, stewed fruit, crumbles, and simple pans of cooked apple, so often that the scent of them together reads immediately as home. Cinnamon also finds a place in bowls of porridge and grains, where a small amount is added to oats, rice, or other warm grains, either while they cook or just after they're taken off the heat. Stirred through the thick mixture, the cinnamon disperses gradually, turning pale grains into something more fragrant and softly colored. As the porridge sits, the aroma is released gradually, rising with the faint curls of steam that leave the bowl. There is no event here, only a simple breakfast rhythm. Spoon, bowl, warmth, a spice that returns morning after morning. In drinks, cinnamon's presence is quieter still, more about the air above the cup than the liquid itself. It can be added to tea or warm milk, sometimes as a stick left to rest in the pot, sometimes as a pinch of powder or a mixture blended with other spices. The cinnamon is left to steep, its bark meeting the heat and slowly giving up some of its oils to the liquid. Over minutes, the flavor deepens modestly, never rising to dominance, while the aroma lifts more freely, surrounding the drink with a sense of warmth before the first sip is taken. These drinks are often made occasionally, not every day. A cup in cooler weather, an evening when quiet is needed, a moment that calls for something familiar and gentle. Across these different uses, in rolls with apples and bowls of grain, and in cups of warmth, cinnamon does the same quiet work in many forms. It ties together the softness of dough, the brightness of fruit, the steadiness of grains, and the comfort of drinks. Each time, the spice remains modest in quantity but generous in effect, allowing the body and mind to settle into something known. Cinnamon has quietly followed food into the long, uncertain spaces of storage, where time and air ask more of ingredients than immediate flavor. Long before there were labels or refrigerators, people learned that certain spices did more than simply season. They helped food last a little longer, or at least seem safer and more appealing as days went by. In many places, cinnamon was used around foods that needed to keep beyond their natural freshness. Its strong, steady aroma could soften the harsher smells of age, especially in times when preservation was imperfect and seasons were long. Meat, fat, and dense preparations sometimes receive cinnamon not to disguise something truly spoiled, but to make stored or heavily salted foods more pleasant when they reach the table. The spice's sweetness did not erase reality, but it made the border between fresh and kept a little easier to cross. Cinnamon also found its way into dried fruits and preserves. Thin slices of fruit laid out to dry, or simmered slowly into thick paste were often touched with spice, cinnamon among them. The essential oils and phenolic compounds in the bark have gentle antimicrobial effects, giving some protection against the growth of unwanted molds or bacteria, especially when combined with low moisture and sugar. The result was not perfect safety, but a quiet support to what drying and sweetness had already begun, helping these foods endure storage and travel. Over time, the association between cinnamon and keeping well became part of its character. It seemed natural to pair it with foods intended for the storeroom or the journey. Dense cakes, preserves, mulled syrups, and spiced mixtures that would be revisited over days or weeks. The spice brought a sense of reliability. People knew, even without modern language for microbes or oxidation, that food scented with cinnamon held their own a little longer and felt more trustworthy when opened again. Today, that old instinct remains in gentler ways. Cinnamon still appears in recipes meant to last more than a moment. In jars of compote, in slowly dried slices, in loaves that stay tender for days. Its preservative powers are now understood more clearly. But in the kitchen, they are felt the same way they always were, as a small reassurance that what we keep in return will still welcome us, smelling warm and sound after time has passed. Cinnamon has become a quiet constant across the world, present in so many kitchens that its journey can almost be forgotten. Yet if you follow its trail dish by dish, you can feel how far it has traveled and how gently it has adapted to different tastes while remaining recognizably itself. In many Middle Eastern and Persian dishes, cinnamon sits among other deep spices, folded into rice, stews, and slow-cooked meats where sweetness, sourness, and richness all meet in the same pot. In these kitchens, it often leans savory, paired with pomegranate, nuts, or herbs, lending warmth and depth without ever turning the dish into dessert. Across parts of South Asia, it slips into curries and fragrant rice, joining cardamom, cloves, and bay in the base of the pan, part of the soft, aromatic foundation that supports everything else. In Southeast Asia, it perfumes broths and soups, such as pho and certain curries, where it becomes one note in a layered chorus of spice. In Europe, cinnamon is more closely tied to baking and winter comfort, showing up in cakes, biscuits, pastries, and mulled drinks, especially when the days grow colder and people naturally reach for warmth. In Latin America, it winds through sweets and drinks, from churros dusted in cinnamon sugar to rice puddings and spiced milks, each culture drawing out a slightly different side of the same spice. The quantities change, the company around it shifts, but the essential character remains. Wherever it appears, cinnamon is still recognizable as cinnamon. Over time, this widespread use has made cinnamon into something more than a special ingredient. It has become a background spice, present in cupboards almost by default, ready to be reached for without ceremony. It is used without much thought, shaken into batters, teas, porridges, or stews and movements, so familiar they no longer feel like decisions. When the container finally empties, it is replaced as a matter of course, added to shopping lists almost automatically, as though the kitchen would feel incomplete without it. Few people measure it precisely in daily cooking. Instead, they sprinkle and taste, guided by memory and habit. In this way, cinnamon becomes part of the quiet structure of everyday food. Not the focus, not the headline, but a gentle presence that keeps returning, steady and unannounced, as life moves softly around it. Cinnamon rests quietly in its containers after the last use, whether as slender sticks tucked into a tin or as fine powder layered at the bottom of a glass jar. The sticks, having given what they offer to a pot or cup, dry slowly over time in their sheltered space, their curls tightening just a little more with each passing day. The ground spice settles evenly, its particles finding their places undisturbed unless shaken again, the faint gold of its color holding steady in stillness. Cinnamon continues without attention, faithful to its nature through seasons of use and rest. The sticks remain fragrant within their tight rolls, waiting for the next moment they might meet heat or liquid. The powder holds its aroma in suspension, ready to rise again when sprinkled or stirred. Neither form demands care or rotation. They simply endure, their presence so reliable that it becomes invisible. A jar might sit unchanged for weeks, then months, and still offer the same gentle warmth when finally opened. This unhurried persistence mirrors the life it came from. The tree that grew without haste, the bark that curled without force, the trade that carried it across years and oceans. In the kitchen, that same rhythm plays out on a smaller scale. Cinnamon does not fade dramatically or announce its limits. It withdraws gradually, offering less at the edges but never losing its core. The cook notices only when reaching for more, and even then, the replacement feels like continuation rather than renewal. Containers of cinnamon become quiet landmarks in the home. They mark the passage of small routines, mornings with tea, evenings with bread, holidays with deeper scents, without ever drawing focus to themselves. As days turn into weeks, the containers hold their secrets softly. The sticks dry to an even deeper brown, their fragrance concentrating inward. The ground spice settles into stillness, its top layer paling slightly while the depth below stays rich. When the kitchen quiets completely, counters empty, lights dimmed, air cool, the cinnamon remains. It has no story left to tell tonight, no flavor left to give. Yet tomorrow, or the day after, or the one after that, a hand will find it again. The lid will turn, the scent will lift, and the cycle will continue as it always has. Gentle, unforced, familiar beyond words. In this way, cinnamon becomes part of the kitchen's own breath, inhaling the work of the day, exhaling into rest, always ready for what comes next. The containers sit as patient witnesses, their contents drying slowly, settling quietly, enduring without need for notice. The world turns, seasons shift, but cinnamon stays, a small warmth holding steady in the heart of the home.